luxury SUV careened wildly down the mountain road, brakes screaming uselessly as it hurtled toward the cliff edge. Dylan Porter didn't think. He just yanked his battered maintenance truck sideways, creating a barrier between certain death and the terrified woman behind the wheel. Metal shrieked against metal as the vehicles collided, finally grinding to a stop mere feet from the 1,000-foot drop. As Dylan stumbled from his truck to check on the driver, he froze. The woman climbing shakily from the SUV, 3 frightened kids clutching her designer coat, wore a face he'd spent 6 years trying to forget. More shocking still, around her neck hung a silver locket he'd recognize anywhere. The same locket his wife had been wearing the night she walked out on him and their newborn daughter without explanation. What would you do if saving someone's life meant confronting the person who destroyed yours? Share your thoughts below. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's harsh beep shattered the pre-dawn silence at 4:30 a.m. Dylan Porter's hand shot out from under the thin blanket, silencing it before the sound could wake his daughter. At 38, his body protested the uncomfortable pull-out couch that served as his bed, his back stiff from another night of restless sleep. The small 2-bedroom apartment in Brookhaven wasn't much, but the second bedroom belonged entirely to 7-year-old Emma, and that was all that mattered. Dylan swung his legs onto the cold linoleum floor and rubbed his face, feeling the stubble that had grown overnight. Another day, another early start. He moved quietly through the cramped kitchen, starting the coffee maker before heading to the tiny bathroom for a quick shower. By 5:15, he was dressed in his janitorial uniform, the navy blue shirt with Brookhaven Medical Center embroidered on the pocket, and preparing breakfast. The smell of pancakes finally drew Emma from her room. She appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair tangled from sleep, dragging her favorite stuffed rabbit by one ear. Her pajamas were slightly too small. Dylan made a mental note to buy new ones when his next paycheck came. "Morning, Daddy," she yawned, climbing onto one of the mismatched kitchen chairs. "Good morning, sunshine," Dylan replied, his tired face brightening instantly. He flipped a pancake onto her plate, arranging blueberries into a smiley face the way he did every morning. "Big day at school today?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "We're doing art projects. Mrs. Patterson says we can draw anything we want." Dylan knew without asking what Emma would draw. She always drew the same thing: a family, a daddy, a little girl, and a shadowy figure that represented the mother she barely remembered. The drawings broke his heart every time, but he never discouraged them. Emma had a right to wonder about the woman who'd given birth to her. This was their routine, had been for 6 years now. Dylan rising before dawn, making breakfast, getting Emma ready for school before his shift at the hospital began at 6:30 a.m. After 8 hours of mopping floors, cleaning bathrooms, and emptying trash bins, he'd pick Emma up from the after-school program, then head to his second job 3 nights a week as a night custodian at Pinnacle Tower, the gleaming office building downtown. The hours were brutal, the pay barely enough, but every dollar went toward Emma's needs and the medical expenses that haunted him. Emma had been born with a kidney condition that required regular monitoring and would eventually need surgical intervention. The bills from her specialists piled up on Dylan's small desk, a constant reminder of how precarious their situation was. His insurance from the hospital covered some costs, but the co-pays and out-of-pocket expenses were slowly drowning him. "Daddy, can we go to the park this weekend?" Emma asked between bites of pancake. "We'll see, sweetheart," Dylan hedged, knowing his weekend would likely involve picking up extra shifts Maybe Sunday afternoon if Daddy doesn't have to work. Emma's face fell slightly, but she recovered quickly. She was used to her father's unpredictable schedule, had learned not to expect too much. That resignation in a 7-year-old's eyes gutted Dylan more than any physical exhaustion ever could. As Emma finished breakfast and went to get dressed for school, Dylan stared at the small framed photo on the refrigerator. It showed him at 32, significantly less weathered, holding a newborn Emma. Standing beside him was Juliana, his wife, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, a silver locket gleaming at her throat. She was smiling at the camera, but Dylan had studied that photo so many times he could see something in her eyes he'd missed back then. A distance, a sadness, maybe even guilt. 3 weeks after that photo was taken, Dylan had come home from work to find Emma crying in her crib and Juliana gone. No note, no explanation, no forwarding address. Just gone, as if she'd never existed. The only thing she'd left behind was the other half of the locket set he'd given her on their wedding day. Hers engraved with always, his with forever. He'd found her half on the bathroom counter, deliberately left behind. For months, Dylan had searched desperately. He'd filed missing person reports, hired a private investigator he couldn't afford, posted on social media, contacted her family who claimed they hadn't heard from her either. Eventually, the trail went cold. Juliana had vanished as completely as if the earth had swallowed her whole. The hardest part wasn't the abandonment, though that had nearly destroyed him. It was explaining to Emma as she grew older why she didn't have a mommy like other kids. How do you tell a young girl that her mother chose to leave? That she wasn't enough to make her stay? Dylan had settled on a gentle version of the truth. Mommy had to go away and couldn't come back. It wasn't Emma's fault. Mommy loved her very much. Emma had accepted this explanation with the simple faith of early years. But lately the questions had become more probing. Where did Mommy go? Why can't she visit? Does she think about us? Dylan deflected as best he could, but he knew the day was coming when Emma would demand real answers he didn't have. "Ready, Daddy?" Emma announced, appearing with her backpack and the drawing she'd completed the night before. Another family portrait. They drove to Maplewood Elementary in Dylan's 15-year-old pickup truck, the one reliable possession he'd managed to keep through everything. The heater worked intermittently, and the passenger door required a special jiggle to open properly. But it ran, and that was enough. After dropping Emma at school with their usual 3-squeeze hug, their secret code for "I love you," Dylan headed to Brookhaven Medical Center. The hospital sat on the outskirts of town, a sprawling complex where he spent his days invisible among the doctors, nurses, and patients who never really saw him. Dylan took pride in his work, despite its humble nature. He kept the floors spotless, the bathrooms sanitized, the common areas welcoming. When elderly patients struggled to reach something or needed help getting to their car, Dylan was there. When a worried family member looked lost, Dylan offered directions with a kind smile. His co-workers appreciated his steady reliability, even if the job itself garnered little respect. During his lunch break, eaten quickly in the staff cafeteria, Dylan calculated his finances on a napkin. Emma's next specialist appointment was in 2 weeks. The copay would be $200. His truck needed new tires, another $400 he didn't have. Rent was due in 10 days. His second job would cover most of it, but he'd be short again, forced to choose between groceries and utilities. Sometimes, in his darkest moments, Dylan wondered if Emma would be better off with someone else. Someone who could give her a stable home, nice clothes, vacations, and opportunities he couldn't provide. But then he'd remember her face lighting up when he came to pick her up from school, the way she threw herself into his arms every single day, as if they'd been apart for years instead of hours. He was her world, and she was his. They'd make it work somehow. They always did. As Dylan pushed his cleaning cart through the hospital corridors that afternoon, he had no idea that his life was about to change in the most unexpected way possible. That tomorrow's drive down Mountain Pass Road would alter everything he thought he knew about the past 6 years. Fate has a way of bringing unfinished stories full circle, often when we least expect it. 6 years ago, Dylan Porter's life had looked completely different. He'd been a junior architect at Morrison & Associates, a respected firm in the city, with a promising career trajectory and a beautiful wife who was 5 months pregnant with their first daughter. Their apartment had been nicer, their future brighter, their love seemingly unshakable. Juliana Tate had been the light of Dylan's existence from the moment they'd met at a charity fundraiser. She'd been working as an event coordinator then, vivacious and charming, with an infectious laugh that made everyone around her smile. Dylan had been instantly smitten, and somehow, miraculously, she'd felt the same way. Their courtship had been whirlwind, but intense. Within 6 months, they were engaged. A year later, they were married in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens, surrounded by close friends and family. Dylan had never been happier than the day he'd slipped that ring on Juliana's finger and whispered his vows, promising to love her forever. The locket set had been his wedding gift to her. 2 halves of a heart, interlocking perfectly when brought together. His half engraved with forever, hers with always. She'd worn it every single day of their marriage, touching it absently whenever she was deep in thought, as if drawing comfort from its presence. When Juliana discovered she was pregnant, Dylan had thought his life was complete. He'd started taking on extra projects at the firm, determined to provide everything his growing family would need. Juliana had seemed happy, planning the nursery, reading parenting books, attending every doctor's appointment with enthusiasm. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But looking back with the cruel clarity that hindsight provides, Dylan could now see the cracks he'd missed. Juliana had grown quieter in her 3rd trimester, more withdrawn. She'd stopped talking about the future, stopped making plans beyond the baby's arrival. When Dylan asked if everything was okay, she'd smile and assure him she was just tired, just hormonal, just adjusting to the reality of impending motherhood. Emma had been born on a rainy Tuesday in April, tiny and perfect and absolutely miraculous. Dylan had held his daughter for the first time and felt his entire world realign around this small, fragile life. Juliana had seemed happy in those first days, bonding with Emma, nursing her, whispering to her in the quiet hours of the night. But something had been wrong. Dylan knew it in his bones, even if he couldn't articulate it. Juliana would sometimes stare at Emma with an expression Dylan couldn't quite read. Love mixed with something else. Fear, sadness, regret. 3 weeks after bringing Emma home, Dylan had returned from a quick trip to the pharmacy for more diapers. He'd been gone maybe 40 minutes. When he walked through the door, Emma's cries had hit him immediately. Not the fussy crying of a hungry baby, but the desperate wailing of an infant who'd been crying for a while. He'd found Emma alone in her crib, red-faced and frantic. Juliana's car was gone from the parking spot. Her clothes were still in the closet, her toiletries in the bathroom. But her purse was missing. And there, on the bathroom counter, lay her half of the locket, deliberately unclasped and left behind. The panic that had seized Dylan in that moment still lived in his chest 6 years later. He'd called Juliana's phone, disconnected. Her parents, and they hadn't heard from her. Her sister, no contact. Her work, she'd resigned 2 weeks earlier via email, something she'd never mentioned to Dylan. She'd vanished completely, leaving behind only questions and a screaming infant who needed her father to pull himself together fast. The police had been sympathetic, but ultimately unhelpful. Juliana was an adult who left of her own free will. There were no signs of foul play, no evidence of danger. She'd simply chosen to leave. The missing person report was filed, but never led anywhere. The private investigator Dylan had hired, depleting their savings to do so, had found nothing. It was as if Juliana Tate had ceased to exist the moment she drove away from their apartment that day. The weeks that followed had been the darkest of Dylan's life. He'd been completely unprepared for single parenthood, struggling to care for a newborn while simultaneously trying to work and search for his missing wife. Emma had cried constantly those first months, perhaps sensing the absence of her mother, perhaps picking up on Dylan's own despair. His job performance had suffered. He'd missed deadlines, shown up to meetings exhausted and unfocused, made errors that a junior architect couldn't afford to make. When Morrison and Associates had let him go 4 months after Juliana's disappearance, Dylan had barely registered the blow. He'd been in survival mode, focused entirely on keeping Emma alive and healthy. Then had come the diagnosis. Emma, at 6 months old, had been unusually fussy and not gaining weight properly. The pediatrician had run tests, leading to a pediatric nephrologist, leading to the discovery of her kidney condition. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but something that would require ongoing monitoring, possible interventions, and eventually surgery. The medical bills had started immediately. Dylan's COBRA coverage from his old job had been expensive and temporary. He'd burned through what remained of their savings within months. His parents, already retired on fixed incomes in Florida, had helped what little they could, but it wasn't enough. Dylan had taken the first job he could find that offered health insurance, a janitorial position at Brookhaven Medical Center. The pay was a fraction of what he'd made as an architect. The work unglamorous, but it provided the coverage Emma desperately needed. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. The apartment had been downsized, possessions sold, dreams abandoned. Everything that had defined Dylan's life before Emma had been stripped away, leaving only the essential: his daughter and his determination to give her the best life he could despite everything. Over the years, Dylan had tried to move forward. Well-meaning friends had suggested dating, starting over, giving Emma a mother figure. But Dylan couldn't imagine trusting anyone that way again. The abandonment had carved something out of him, left a wound that hadn't healed. How could he open his heart when the last time he'd done so, the person he'd loved most in the world had disappeared without a trace? He'd kept Juliana's half of the locket, couldn't bring himself to throw it away, despite the pain it represented. It sat in a small wooden box on his dresser, alongside their wedding photo and Emma's hospital bracelet from birth. Relics of a life that felt increasingly like it had happened to someone else. Sometimes Dylan would catch himself looking at dark-haired women in crowds, his heart lurching with irrational hope before reality crashed back in. Juliana was gone. Whether she'd started a new life somewhere, suffered some tragedy, or simply wanted nothing to do with the family she'd created, the effect was the same. She'd made her choice, and that choice hadn't included him or Emma. What Dylan didn't know, couldn't have known, was that tomorrow's drive to pick up supplies for the hospital would take him down a mountain road where the past and present were about to collide in the most shocking way imaginable. Across town, In the penthouse suite of Pinnacle Tower, Elise Porter stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Brookhaven's skyline. At 36, she was the CEO of Stellar Innovations, a tech company specializing in sustainable energy solutions that she'd built from the ground up. Her sleek black pantsuit, designer heels, and perfectly styled dark hair projected the image of a woman who had everything under control. The reality was far more complicated. Elise touched the silver locket at her throat, a habitual gesture she performed dozens of times a day without conscious thought. The pendant was the only possession she'd had when she'd woken up in Mercy General Hospital 6 years ago with no memory of who she was or how she'd gotten there. The doctors had diagnosed severe retrograde amnesia following a traumatic car accident on a remote highway. She'd been found unconscious behind the wheel of a vehicle registered to a Juliana Tate, but with no identification on her person except a business card tucked in her jacket pocket. The card had belonged to Richard Porter, CEO of Porter Enterprises, whom she'd apparently met at a business conference 2 weeks before the accident. When no one came forward to claim her, when missing person reports yielded no matches, Richard and his wife Margaret had made an extraordinary decision. They'd taken her in, helped her create a new identity, and eventually offered her a position in their company. Elise had discovered she had a natural aptitude for business strategy and sustainable technology, rising quickly through the ranks. When Richard had passed away 2 years ago, he'd left Stellar Innovations, a subsidiary he'd founded, to Elise, along with a letter expressing his belief that she was meant to do great things. The Porters had given her not just a name and a home, but purpose and a future when she'd had nothing. Yet despite her success, despite the gratitude she felt toward the family who'd saved her, Elise couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was missing. She had wealth, respect, and achievement, but no past, no roots, no sense of where she truly came from. The locket was her only clue, engraved with a single word: always. She'd had it examined by jewelers, searched for matching pieces online, even hired a private investigator to trace its origins. Nothing had come of it. The design was custom, the engraving generic enough to be meaningless. What haunted Elise most were the dreams. Fragments of memories, maybe, or just her brain's attempt to fill in the blanks. A baby crying, strong arms holding her close, a man's voice saying, "I love you," against her hair. Were these real memories or manufactured fantasies? She had no way of knowing. The accident had left her with more than just amnesia. Medical scans had revealed internal injuries that had required emergency surgery. One consequence had been permanent infertility, something the doctors had informed her of with clinical detachment, but which had devastated Elise in ways she couldn't fully explain. How could she mourn the loss of something she'd never consciously had? Yet the grief was real, a deep ache for a future she couldn't remember planning. Margaret Porter, Richard's widow and the closest thing Elise had to family now, often encouraged her to stop dwelling on the past. "You have a wonderful life now, dear," Margaret would say gently. Sometimes moving forward is healthier than looking back. Elise knew she was right, tried to take that advice to heart. She'd thrown herself into building Stellar Innovations, working 16-hour days, making the company a leader in sustainable technology. She dated occasionally, nothing serious, unable to fully commit when she didn't even know her own history. What if she was already married? What if she had people out there looking for her? The business card that had led the Porters to identify her had mentioned something about an interview, though details were scarce. Had she been pursuing a career opportunity when the accident happened? Fleeing from something? The questions never ended. This morning, Elise had a particularly challenging day ahead. She was overseeing the final stages of a major project in Lakewood, a town about an hour away, via Mountain Pass Road. The winding route through the mountains was notorious for its sharp curves and steep drops, but it was the fastest way to reach the rural community where Stellar Innovations was installing a new solar array system. What made today more complicated was that she'd agreed to bring along 3 kids from the Brookhaven Youth Center, part of her company's community outreach program. The teenagers, Tyler, Sophia, and Marcus, were participants in Stellar's STEM education initiative, and she'd promised them a field trip to see sustainable technology in action. Elise checked her watch. She needed to pick up the teenagers in 40 minutes, then make the drive to Lakewood for a 2 p.m. site inspection. Her assistant had prepared a detailed itinerary, confirmed the vehicle from their company fleet, arranged for lunch. Everything was perfectly organized, as always. What Elise didn't know was that the luxury SUV she'd be driving had a fatal flaw. A brake line issue that had been missed during routine maintenance, a problem that would only manifest under specific conditions, like the steep, winding descent down Mountain Pass Road. As she gathered her materials for the day, Elise paused at the mirror in her office bathroom, studying her reflection as she often did, searching for clues in her own face. Did she look like someone who'd once had a different life? Were there traces of another identity hidden in her features? The locket glinted at her throat. Always. Always what? Always loving someone? Always lost? Always searching? She shook off the melancholy thoughts. Today was about work, about showing these kids the practical applications of sustainable technology, about being the successful, put-together CEO everyone expected her to be. Elise grabbed her designer purse and headed for the elevator, her heels clicking confidently against the polished marble floor. She'd built a good life from nothing, created an identity and a purpose. Maybe that was enough. Maybe she needed to stop chasing ghosts and accept that Elise Porter was who she truly was now. But as she slid behind the wheel of the sleek black SUV an hour later, 3 excited teenagers chattering in the back seats about renewable energy and career opportunities. She felt that familiar tug of something forgotten, something important just beyond her conscious reach. The drive to Lakewood started uneventfully. They climbed steadily into the mountains, the teenagers asking intelligent questions about the solar project, about running a company, about how Elise had gotten started in the industry. She answered as honestly as she could, carefully editing around the 6-year gap in her history that she never discussed publicly. As they reached the summit and began the descent down Mountain Pass Road, Elise noticed the SUV felt slightly different, the brake pedal requiring a bit more pressure than usual. She made a mental note to have the vehicle serviced when they returned to Brookhaven. What she didn't realize was that with each application of the brakes on the winding mountain road, the damaged brake line was deteriorating further. And in exactly 17 minutes, on the steepest section of the descent, it would fail completely, sending them careening toward disaster and toward a reunion 6 years in the making. Dylan Porter had taken the afternoon off from the hospital, a rarity he couldn't really afford, to drive up to Lakewood for supplies. The medical center's usual vendor had discontinued a particular brand of industrial cleaner that worked best on the surgical floor's specialized tile, but a janitorial supply warehouse in Lakewood still carried it. His supervisor had agreed to let Dylan make the run, knowing how particular he was about doing his job right. Emma was safely at school, and Dylan had calculated he could make the round trip in 3 hours, picking her up right on time. He'd even allowed himself to feel slightly optimistic about the overtime pay he'd earned this weekend. Maybe enough to finally replace Emma's winter coat that was getting too small. The drive up Mountain Pass Road had been pleasant, the autumn colors spectacular against the mountain backdrop. Dylan's old pickup truck handled the climb steadily, and he'd allowed his mind to wander to mundane concerns. Grocery lists, Emma's upcoming parent-teacher conference, whether he could pick up an extra shift next week. Loading the supplies at the Lakewood warehouse had taken longer than expected. By the time Dylan started the descent back down Mountain Pass Road, he was cutting it close to make it to Emma's school on time. He pushed the truck a bit faster than usual, though still well within safe limits. The road was treacherous enough without taking stupid risks. He was about halfway down, navigating a particularly sharp curve, when he saw it. A black luxury SUV coming down behind him, moving far too fast. Even from a distance, Dylan could tell something was wrong. The vehicle was weaving slightly, the driver clearly struggling for control. Dylan's first instinct was to get out of the way. He pulled toward the shoulder, watching in his rearview mirror as the SUV gained speed. Then he saw the faces in the back window. 3 kids, eyes wide with terror. Time seemed to slow down. Dylan assessed the situation in seconds. The curve ahead was severe, with a guardrail that looked decorative at best. Beyond it was nothing but air and a 1,000-foot drop into the ravine below. The SUV wasn't going to make the turn, not at that speed with clearly failing brakes. He didn't think. There wasn't time for thought, only instinct. Dylan yanked his steering wheel hard right, positioning his truck perpendicular across both lanes. He threw the gear into park and braced himself, one hand instinctively covering his face as the SUV barreled toward him. The impact was tremendous. Metal shrieked against metal as the SUV slammed into the side of his truck. Dylan's head snapped sideways, his shoulder taking the brunt of the collision. The truck skidded backward from the force, its tires screaming, but it held position, creating a barrier that absorbed the SUV's momentum. Both vehicles ground to a halt mere feet from where the guardrail began its curve. Beyond that, nothing but empty space and certain death. For a moment, there was only silence, except for the hiss of steam from damaged radiators and the ticking of hot metal. Dylan's ears rang from the impact. His shoulder throbbed. But he was alive, and more importantly, the SUV had stopped. Dylan shoved his door open. It required 2 tries and some creative forcing, and stumbled out on unsteady legs. Adrenaline coursed through his system as he rushed toward the SUV. Through the cracked windshield, he could see movement. "Is everyone okay?" he called out, reaching for the driver's door handle. The door opened from the inside, and a woman practically fell out, catching herself on the frame. She was shaking violently, her designer clothes disheveled, a small cut bleeding on her forehead. "The kids," she gasped. "Are the kids okay?" Dylan was already moving to the back doors. 3 teenagers were climbing out, shaken but apparently uninjured. The girl was crying. One of the boys looked ready to vomit, but they were alive and mobile. "Everyone out of the vehicle," Dylan instructed, his voice calmer than he felt. "Move away from the edge, back toward the mountainside of the road." The teenagers stumbled toward safety. Dylan turned back to help the woman, who was leaning heavily against the SUV, still visibly trembling. "Are you hurt?" he asked, taking her arm to steady her. "Can you walk?" She nodded, allowing him to guide her away from the vehicles. As they moved toward the shoulder, she turned to look at him fully for the first time, perhaps to thank him. Dylan's world stopped. The face looking at him was older, the hair shorter and styled differently, the clothes expensive rather than practical. But the features were unmistakable. The dark eyes, the curve of her jaw, the small scar on her left eyebrow from a childhood accident. "Juliana." The name came out as barely a whisper. The woman stared at him, confusion evident on her face. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" Dylan couldn't speak, His eyes dropped to her neck, and there it was. The silver locket. His locket. The one he'd given her on their wedding day, engraved with always. His hand went automatically to his own chest, feeling through his shirt for the matching half he'd started wearing on a chain 6 months ago, after years of keeping it hidden in a drawer. A talisman against forgetting, against giving up, against accepting that she was truly gone forever. "Your necklace," he managed, his voice rough. "Where did you get that necklace?" The woman's hand flew to the locket, a protective gesture. "I've always had it." "Why? What's this about?" "Always had it?" Dylan felt like the ground was tilting beneath him. "You've always had it?" One of the teenagers called out, "Miss Porter, should I call 911? "Porter." She'd said her name was Porter. "Yes, Tyler, please call for help," the woman responded, never taking her eyes off Dylan. Something in his expression must have alarmed her, because she took a small step back. "Sir, I think you might be in shock. You should sit down." "You don't remember me." It wasn't a question. Dylan could see it in her eyes. There was no recognition, no flash of memory, nothing but polite concern for a stranger who just saved her life. "I'm sorry, I don't," she said gently. "Have we met before? I'm Elise Porter, CEO of Stellar Innovations. If we've done business together, I apologize, but I'm having trouble placing you." Elise, not Juliana. She thought her name was Elise. 6 years ago, Dylan said, his mind racing to make sense of the impossible. 6 years ago, did something happen to you? An accident? The color drained from Elise's face. How could you possibly know that? Before Dylan could answer, sirens wailed in the distance. The teenagers had gotten through to emergency services. Within minutes, this mountain road would be swarming with first responders, and Dylan's chance to get answers would disappear. He pulled the chain from beneath his shirt, revealing the half-heart pendant. "Because 6 years ago, my wife disappeared without a trace. And when she left, she was wearing the other half of that locket you're wearing right now." Elise stared at the pendant, then at her own, her face going even paler. Her hand trembled as she lifted her locket, holding it up. Even from a distance, Dylan could see what he already knew. The two halves would fit together perfectly. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I don't know you. I've never seen you before in my life." "Your name is Juliana Tate," Dylan said, his voice breaking. "You're my wife, and we have a daughter named Emma who's been asking about you for 6 years. The words hung in the mountain air between them, heavy with implications neither could fully process. Behind them, the teenagers watched with wide eyes, sensing they were witnessing something significant. The sirens grew louder, reality closing in on this moment of suspended disbelief. Elise touched her forehead, where blood was trickling from the cut, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "I think I need to sit down," she said faintly. Dylan caught her as her knees buckled, guiding her to a relatively flat spot on the shoulder. His shoulders screamed in protest. He definitely injured it in the collision. But he ignored the pain. As the first emergency vehicle came into view around the curve, Dylan looked at the woman in his arms, his wife, a stranger, somehow both, and wondered how he was going to explain any of this to Emma. The aftermath of the Mountain Road incident was chaotic. Paramedics checked everyone over, police took statements, tow trucks were called for both damaged vehicles. Through it all, Dylan couldn't take his eyes off Elise, and she kept glancing at him with an expression caught between fear and desperate curiosity. The EMTs wanted to take Elise to the hospital for the cut on her forehead and possible concussion. She'd refused initially, until one of the paramedics pointed out she was responsible for 3 minors who'd also been in the accident. Setting a good example meant getting checked out properly. "I'll follow you," Dylan had said quietly. "We need to talk." Elise had nodded, looking dazed as she was loaded into the ambulance with the teenagers. Dylan's truck was drivable, barely. The entire passenger side was caved in, but the engine still ran. He'd called Emma's school to explain he'd be late. There'd been an accident. He was fine. He'd be there as soon as possible. Then he'd followed the ambulance down the mountain, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. At Brookhaven General Hospital, ironically just 2 buildings over from where Dylan worked, Elise and the teenagers were examined and treated. Minor injuries all around. Miraculous considering what could have happened. Dylan paced the waiting room, his mind spinning with impossible questions. When Elise finally emerged, the small bandage on her forehead, she found Dylan immediately. "The kids are being picked up by their parents," she said. "Can we talk somewhere private?" They ended up in the hospital cafeteria during the dinner lull, sitting across from each other at a corner table with terrible coffee neither of them drank. For a long moment, neither spoke. "Tell me about her," Elise finally said. "Your daughter." "Emma, you said?" Dylan pulled out his phone, his hands shaking slightly as he navigated to his photos. He turned the screen toward Elise, showing her his lock screen. Emma grinning at the camera, missing her 2 front teeth, holding up a drawing. Elise's breath caught. She took the phone with trembling hands, staring at the image. "She looks like me," she whispered. "She has your eyes," Dylan said softly. "Your smile. The way you..." "She bites her lower lip when she's concentrating, just like you used to." "Used to?" Elise echoed. She swiped through more photos. Emma at the park, Emma eating birthday cake, Emma asleep with her stuffed rabbit. With each image, her expression grew more anguished. "I have a daughter. I have a daughter, and I don't remember her." Dylan told her everything then. Their meeting, their courtship, their marriage. Emma's birth and Juliana's strange behavior in those final weeks. The day he'd come home to find her gone. "I searched everywhere," he said. His voice rough with old pain. Missing person reports, private investigators, social media campaigns. You vanished completely. I thought maybe you died or suffered some kind of breakdown or... He stopped, unable to voice some of the darker possibilities he'd imagined over the years. Elise listened, tears streaming down her face. When Dylan finished, she told her own story. The accident, the amnesia, waking up with no past and only the locket as a clue. The porters taking her in, giving her a new life. "I've been having dreams," she admitted. Fragments that might be memories, a baby crying. "I always thought they were just my mind trying to fill in the blanks. But what if they were real? What if I was remembering her?" They compared timelines. Juliana had disappeared on a Thursday morning. Elise had been found unconscious in a car wreck on a remote highway that same Thursday afternoon, roughly 40 miles from where Dylan and Juliana had lived. "You must have been driving somewhere," Dylan said, trying to piece it together. "But where? And why?" "The business card they found with me was for Richard Porter," Elise said slowly. "I'd met him at a business conference. Maybe I was going to interview with his company. Maybe I was trying to..." She stopped, a horrible thought occurring to her. Maybe I was running away. "You wouldn't do that," Dylan said automatically, then stopped himself. "At least, I didn't think you would. But you did leave." The pain in his voice was evident, and Elise felt it like a physical blow. She'd hurt this man, devastated him, whether she remembered it or not. She'd abandoned a baby, her own daughter. "I need to meet her," Elise said suddenly. "Emma, I need to see her." Dylan's protective instincts flared immediately. "She's 7 years old. I can't just bring you home and say, 'Hey, Emma, guess what? Your mother's back, but she doesn't remember us.' That would traumatize her." "I know," Elise said quickly. "I know. But there has to be a way. Please, Dylan, she's my daughter." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on them both. "Let me think about it," Dylan finally said. "Let me figure out how to handle this. Can I have your number?" They exchanged contact information, both acutely aware of how strange it was to trade phone numbers with your own spouse like strangers making a business connection. As they prepared to part ways, Elise reached out impulsively and took Dylan's hand. "Thank you," she said, "for saving us today, for telling me the truth, for—" Her voice broke. "For not giving up on finding out what happened." Dylan looked down at her hand in his, smaller and softer than he remembered, the nails professionally manicured now instead of practical and short. But the touch was familiar in a way that made his chest ache. "I never gave up," he said quietly. "I just ran out of places to look." Over the next few days, they texted cautiously. Elise sent questions about Emma's favorite things, her allergies, her personality. Dylan answered each one, watching this woman who was his wife, but also a stranger, try to learn about the daughter she couldn't remember. Elise, meanwhile, had told Margaret Porter everything. Her adoptive mother had been stunned but supportive, immediately offering to help however she could. She'd also insisted Elise undergo thorough medical evaluation to see if her memories could be recovered. The neurologist was cautiously optimistic. Sometimes retrograde amnesia resolved on its own, sometimes it didn't. Exposure to people and places from before the memory loss could potentially trigger recall. But there were no guarantees. A week after the Mountain Road incident, Dylan made a decision. He called Elise with a proposal. "There's a children's museum Emma loves," he said. "What if we ran into you there, accidentally? You could meet her as a stranger, spend a little time with her, see how it feels." "Would that be fair to her?" Elise asked, though her voice was eager. "Lying to her?" "It's not lying," Dylan reasoned. "It's protecting her until we figure out what happens next. You could be anyone, a nice lady at the museum. If Emma likes you, maybe we arrange another coincidental meeting. We take it slow." Elise agreed immediately. And that's how, on a Saturday morning, Dylan and Emma found themselves at the Brookhaven Children's Museum, where Elise Porter just happened to be volunteering for her company's community outreach program. Emma had been thrilled about the museum trip. Dylan rarely had full weekends off, so this was a special treat. She'd worn her favorite dress, the blue one with sunflowers that was getting a bit short, and brought her small backpack with snacks and her current favorite book. The Brookhaven Children's Museum was housed in a converted warehouse, full of interactive exhibits about science, history, and art. Emma loved the hands-on nature of everything, the way learning felt like playing. Dylan's heart pounded as they entered, scanning the space for Elise. He spotted her near the Sustainable Energy exhibit, fitting given her company, helping a group of younger kids with a solar panel demonstration. She looked up, meeting his eyes across the room. Even from a distance, he could see her hands trembling. "Daddy, can we do the science section first?" Emma tugged on his hand. "Sure, sweetheart," Dylan managed, guiding her in Elise's direction. As they approached, Elise finished with the younger kids and turned toward them with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Up close, Dylan could see she'd been crying recently, her eyes slightly red despite her professional appearance. "Hello there," Elise said warmly, crouching down to Emma's level. "Are you interested in learning about solar energy?" Emma nodded shyly, pressing slightly against Dylan's leg, her usual reaction to friendly strangers. "Well, you picked a great day. I'm Elise, and I actually work with solar panels and renewable energy at my job." She gestured to the exhibit. "Want to see something cool?" Over the next 20 minutes, Elise showed Emma how the solar panels worked, explaining complex concepts in terms a 7-year-old could understand. Dylan watched in amazement as Emma slowly warmed to this stranger, asking questions, laughing at Elise's jokes, completely unaware she was bonding with her own mother. And Elise. Dylan saw the raw emotion playing across her face every time Emma smiled or took her hand to look at something. She was falling in love with this little girl, the daughter she couldn't remember, but somehow recognized on a cellular level. "You're really smart," Emma declared after successfully completing a circuit board puzzle. "Are you a scientist?" "Sort of," Elise said, her voice slightly thick. "I work with technology that helps the environment. What do you want to be when you grow up?" "I want to be a doctor," Emma said seriously, "so I can help kids who have problems with their hearts like me." Elise's eyes flew to Dylan, questioning. "Emma has a kidney condition," Dylan explained quietly. "She's going to need surgery eventually." "A kidney condition," Elise repeated, and something flickered in her eyes. Pain, guilt, fear. Dylan couldn't tell. "It's okay," Emma assured her, patting Elise's hand with unconscious comfort. "Daddy says I'm brave, and when I'm older, they'll fix it and I'll be all better." Elise had to look away, blinking rapidly. As the morning progressed, the three of them drifted through the museum together. It felt natural, easy in a way that surprised Dylan. Emma was completely comfortable with Elise, showing her favorite exhibits, explaining things she'd learned on previous visits, holding her hand when they navigated crowded sections. At lunch in the museum cafe, Emma suddenly said, "You smell nice, like flowers." Elise smiled. "Thank you. It's lavender. Do you like it?" "My mommy liked lavender," Emma said matter-of-factly. "I don't remember her, but Daddy told me." The table went silent. Dylan's throat tightened, and he saw Elise press her lips together, struggling with emotion. "I bet your mommy was wonderful," Elise said softly. "Daddy says she was," Emma agreed. She took a bite of her sandwich, then added, "I draw pictures of her sometimes. Want to see?" Before Dylan could intervene, Emma was pulling her current masterpiece from her backpack, the familiar 3-person family portrait. Elise took the drawing with shaking hands, staring at the stick figure labeled Mommy with long dark hair. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "Do you have kids?" Emma asked innocently. The question hung in the air. Elise's eyes met Dylan's, full of anguish. "No," she finally said, "but I think I would have liked to." After lunch, they visited the art section where Emma wanted to make a craft project. As she focused intently on gluing sequins to paper, Dylan and Elise stood slightly apart, watching her. "She's amazing," Elise said quietly. "You've done an incredible job raising her." "I'm just doing my best," Dylan replied. "Some days it doesn't feel like enough. She's happy, confident, kind. That's everything." Elise paused. "Dylan, I've been thinking. I want to help. With the medical bills, with whatever you need. Not as..." She struggled for words. "Not as anything, just as someone who wants to help." "I don't need charity," Dylan said automatically. the old pride flaring. It's not charity. She's my daughter, even if she doesn't know it yet, even if I don't remember. The DNA test confirmed it. I had it done this week. Elise's voice was firm. Let me do this, please. Before Dylan could respond, Emma called out, Elise, come see, I made a butterfly. The afternoon stretched into early evening. When the museum began closing, Emma's face fell. Do we have to go? I'm afraid so, sweetheart, Dylan said. Emma turned to Elise. Will you be here next time we come? I volunteer here most Saturdays, Elise said, which was true as of 3 days ago when she'd signed up specifically for this. So, probably yes. Good. Emma surprised them both by hugging Elise tightly. You're nice. I like you. Over Elise's shoulder, Dylan saw his wife's face crumple with emotion. She hugged Emma back carefully, as if afraid she might break. I like you too, Elise whispered. Very much. That encounter became a pattern. Every Saturday, Dylan and Emma would coincidentally run into Elise at various places around Brookhaven, the Children's Museum, the park, the public library. Each time, their bond grew stronger. Elise learned Emma's quirks, how she hummed when she was happy, how she bit her lip when concentrating, how she always saved her favorite food for last. Emma, in turn, gravitated toward Elise with an ease that surprised Dylan. His daughter was typically shy with new people, but with Elise, it was different. Natural. One rainy Saturday, they met at the library. Emma had a cold and was cranky, not her usual sunny self. Without thinking, Elise picked her up, settling her on her lap, and began reading to her in a soft voice. Emma relaxed immediately, thumb creeping toward her mouth, a habit she only indulged when sick or very tired. Dylan watched them from across the table, his chest tight. Elise was rocking slightly, an unconscious soothing motion, and Emma's eyes were drifting closed. It looked right. It looked like what should have been their life for the past 6 years. Dylan, Elise said quietly, noticing his stare. What is it? You used to do that, he said. Rock her like that. When she was a baby and couldn't sleep. I'd find you in the nursery at 2 a.m, rocking and humming. You said it calmed her. Elise looked down at Emma, then back at Dylan. I don't remember, she said, but her eyes were wet. But it feels right, like muscle memory. As weeks passed, Elise became a regular presence in their lives. She'd stop by Dylan's apartment with books for Emma or invite them to dinner at nice restaurants Dylan could never afford. She bought Emma a winter coat without asking, leaving it as a gift that would have been rude to refuse. Dylan's resistance slowly eroded. He saw how Emma bloomed under the attention, how she laughed more freely, how she'd started drawing 4-person family pictures now, adding a figure she labeled Friend Elise. But he also saw the toll it took on Elise, the way she'd watch Emma with barely concealed longing, the way her hand would reach for the child and stop halfway, the tears she'd hide when Emma said something particularly sweet. They were living a lie, and everyone knew it except Emma. The question was, how long could they maintain it? 3 months into their carefully orchestrated, coincidental meetings, the fragile balance Dylan and Elise had maintained began to crack. Emma had grown deeply attached to Elise, talking about her constantly, asking when they'd see her next, incorporating her into every aspect of her life. The drawings now prominently featured Friend Elise, and more troublingly, Emma had started asking questions neither Dylan nor Elise knew how to answer. Why doesn't Elise have a family? Emma had asked one night at bedtime. She's so nice. Doesn't she have kids of her own? Dylan had deflected, but the question haunted him. They were playing with fire, creating a bond that would devastate Emma if it was suddenly severed. Yet telling her the truth felt equally impossible. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that the woman she'd befriended was actually the mother who disappeared from her life? The situation came to a head on a Tuesday afternoon. Dylan was at work, mopping the third-floor hallway at Brookhaven Medical Center, when his phone rang. Emma's school. His heart immediately jumped to his throat. Calls from school during the day were never good news. Mr. Porter, this is Principal Hayes. Emma's fine, but we need you to come pick her up. She's in the nurse's office. Dylan abandoned his mop bucket and rushed to the school, his mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. When he arrived, he found Emma sitting on the nurse's cot, looking small and miserable, holding an ice pack to her arm. "What happened?" Dylan demanded, kneeling beside her. "She fell during recess," the nurse explained. "Possible sprain. I'd recommend having it x-rayed to be safe." As Dylan gathered Emma's things and signed her out, his daughter remained unusually quiet. In the truck, he finally got the real story. "I was trying to do the monkey bars like Elise showed me," Emma admitted, tears starting to flow. "She said if I was brave and kept practicing, I'd get strong enough. But I fell and it really hurts, Daddy." Dylan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "When did Elise show you monkey bars?" "Last Saturday at the park. She was really good at them. She said when she was little." Emma stopped, wincing as the truck hit a bump. "She said she doesn't remember being little, but her body remembers how to do things. That's weird, right?" It wasn't weird. It was amnesia. And it was the kind of comment that could lead to questions Dylan wasn't prepared to answer. At the emergency room, the same one where he'd first seen Elise after the Mountain Road accident, they waited for x-rays. Dylan texted Elise to let her know what happened, and within 20 minutes, she appeared in the waiting room, still in her business suit, clearly having rushed from her office. "Is she okay?" Elise asked breathlessly. "I came as soon as I got your message." "Probably just a sprain," Dylan said, then lowered his voice. "Elise, you shouldn't be here. This is getting complicated. She's hurt. I needed to be here." Elise's tone was firm, brooking no argument. When Emma saw Elise, her face lit up despite her pain. "You came. Daddy, look, Elise came." The nurse called them back for x-rays, and Elise naturally followed. The radiology technician assumed she was Emma's mother and directed positioning instructions to her. Neither Dylan nor Elise corrected the assumption. The x-rays showed no fracture, just a moderate sprain. The doctor wrapped Emma's wrist and provided care instructions. As they prepared to leave, the billing department called Dylan aside. "Mr. Porter, we need to discuss payment arrangements, with Emma's existing medical accounts and today's visit." "I'll take care of it," Elise interrupted, pulling out a credit card before Dylan could respond. "Charge everything to this." Dylan's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Elise, no." "Dylan, this isn't the time." "I said no." His voice was sharp enough that Emma looked over, concerned. Taking a breath, Dylan forced himself to speak more calmly. "Emma, honey, go sit in those chairs for a minute. The adults need to talk." Once Emma was out of earshot, Dylan rounded on Elise. "You can't just swoop in and pay for everything. You can't make decisions about her medical care. You can't—" He stopped, aware they were in public. "I'm trying to help," Elise said, her voice tight. "You're trying to buy your way into being her mother." Dylan shot back. "That's not how this works." The words landed like a slap. Elise's face went pale. That's not fair. I am her mother, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. You don't remember being her mother, Dylan said, and immediately regretted the cruelty of it. Elise, I'm sorry, I didn't mean… No, you're right. Elise's voice was flat now, controlled. I don't remember. I don't remember giving birth to her, or nursing her, or any of the first year of her life. I don't remember you either, or loving you, or whatever happened that made me leave. All I know is that when I look at that little girl, I feel something I can't explain, and watching her in pain and not being able to do anything about it is torture. So what do you want from me? Dylan asked, exhausted. What's the endgame here, Elise? We keep pretending you're just a family friend? We tell Emma the truth and risk traumatizing her? What? Go back to being a family like the last 6 years didn't happen? I don't know, Elise admitted, tears spilling over. I don't know what I want except to not feel like I'm on the outside of my own life anymore. They stood in the hospital corridor, the fluorescent lights harsh overhead. Two people torn between past and present, unable to move forward or back. Emma's voice broke the standoff. Daddy? Elise? Are you fighting? Both adults immediately composed themselves. No, sweetheart, Dylan said, moving to her. Just adult talk. Let's get you home. Can Elise come? Emma asked hopefully. She makes the best soup when people are sick. Remember when I had the flu? Dylan did remember. He'd been working his night shift when Emma had spiked a fever. Elise had been there within minutes of his panicked text, staying up all night to help. She'd known exactly how to comfort Emma, what foods she'd tolerate, even which stuffed animal would make her feel safest. At the time, Dylan had been grateful. Now, it felt like another piece of evidence of how enmeshed Elise had become in their lives. Not tonight, Dylan said firmly. Emma needs rest. He saw the hurt flash across Elise's face, but she nodded. Of course. Feel better, sweetheart. She bent to kiss Emma's forehead, a gesture so maternal it made Dylan's chest ache. As they left the hospital, Emma waved at Elise until they turned the corner. In the truck, she was quiet for a moment before asking, Daddy, do you like Elise? Of course I like her, Dylan said carefully. But do you like her? Emma persisted with a 7-year-old's blunt curiosity. Like love, kinda like? Dylan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. It's complicated, Em. Madison at school says her parents love each other because they hold hands and kiss. You and Elise don't do that, but you look at each other weird sometimes, like you're sad and happy at the same time. Out of the mouths of babes, Dylan thought. Elise is a friend, he said finally. A good friend who cares about you very much. I wish she was my mom, Emma said softly. Is that bad? To wish that? Dylan pulled the truck over, unable to drive through the tears suddenly blurring his vision. He twisted in his seat to look at his daughter. That's not bad at all, sweetheart. Your mom, wherever she is, I'm sure she'd be happy you have people in your life who care about you. Do you think my real mom knows about Elise? Emma asked. Do you think she'd be mad that I like Elise so much? The irony was so painful, Dylan almost laughed. No, baby, I don't think she'd be mad at all. Over the next week, Dylan pulled back. He stopped responding to Elise's texts as frequently, declined her invitations to meet, made excuses about being busy with work. He told himself he was protecting Emma, establishing boundaries, preventing an even more painful separation down the line. But Emma noticed, She asked constantly when they'd see Elise, grew sullen when Dylan said they were too busy, started having trouble sleeping again, something that hadn't been an issue since Elise came into their lives. Elise, for her part, seemed to understand she was being shut out. Her messages became less frequent, more formal. The easy warmth they developed cooled into polite distance. Margaret Porter called Dylan one evening after Emma was in bed. "She's miserable," Margaret said without preamble. "Elise, she won't admit it, but I hear her crying at night. She's obsessing over medical journals about amnesia, spending hours looking at photos she's taken of Emma, trying to remember. This is destroying her. What am I supposed to do?" Dylan asked helplessly. "Keep letting her play house with us? Eventually, Emma's going to figure things out, or Elise's memories will come back, or something will change, and then what? Emma gets hurt either way. Or you could tell Emma the truth," Margaret suggested gently. "Children are more resilient than we give them credit for." "Emma's been through enough," Dylan said firmly. "I won't put her through more just because Elise wants to feel like a mother without any of the memories of actually being one." As soon as the words left his mouth, Dylan knew they were unfair. But he was scared. Scared of how much Emma had come to depend on Elise. Scared of his own complicated feelings for this woman who was his wife, but also a stranger. Scared of building something beautiful that would inevitably shatter. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Dylan arrived at Emma's school for pickup and found his daughter sitting in the office with the principal, the school counselor, and Elise. "What's going on?" Dylan demanded, his protective instincts immediately flaring. "Mr. Porter, please sit down," Principal Hayes said. "Emma had an incident today at school." "What kind of incident?" The counselor spoke up. "Emma told her class during sharing time that she wished Elise was her mother. Another student said that was silly because her real mother left because she didn't want her. Emma became quite upset." Dylan's vision went red. "Which student? I want to talk to their parents." "The situation has been handled," Principal Hayes assured him. But Emma was quite distraught. "She called Elise instead of you." Dylan looked at his daughter, who was staring at her lap, and then at Elise, who met his gaze steadily. "She knows my number," Elise said quietly. "I gave it to her weeks ago. Told her she could call me anytime for anything. I'm sorry if that was overstepping, but Dylan, she needed someone, and she called me." "I'm her father," Dylan said, his voice tight. "She should have called me." "You're always working," Emma said, so quietly they almost didn't hear her. "I didn't want to bother you." The word struck Dylan like a physical blow. His daughter hadn't called him because she didn't want to be a burden. What kind of life had he created for her where she felt that way? "Emma, you were never a bother," he said, kneeling beside her chair. "Never. I'm sorry if I made you feel like you couldn't call me." Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Dylan held her tightly, aware of Elise watching them with an expression of such profound sadness it was almost unbearable. In the parking lot afterward, Dylan finally confronted what he'd been avoiding. "This isn't working," he said to Elise. "This situation, whatever we're doing, it's confusing Emma, and it's not fair to any of us." "So what are you saying?" Elise asked, though her face suggested she already knew. "I think we need to stop seeing each other," Dylan said, each word like pulling teeth. "Emma's getting too attached, and when this inevitably ends badly—" "When I inevitably leave, you mean?" Elise interrupted. "That's what you're really afraid of, isn't it? That history will repeat itself. That I'll remember who I was and decide I don't want this life after all." Dylan didn't deny it. Can you promise me that won't happen? Can you stand there and honestly say that if all your memories came back tomorrow, you'd choose us?" Elise opened her mouth, then closed it, unable to make a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "That's what I thought," Dylan said, his voice heavy with resignation and old pain. "I can't put Emma through that. I won't." "Dylan, please, stay away from us, Elise," Dylan said, his voice breaking on her name. "It's better this way, for everyone." He got in his truck with Emma and drove away, watching in the rearview mirror as Elise stood alone in the parking lot. One hand pressed to the locket at her throat, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. That night, Emma cried herself to sleep, asking for Elise. And Dylan sat in his living room, holding the matching half of the locket he wore, wondering if he'd just made the worst mistake of his life, or the only decision that made sense. The separation was brutal for everyone involved. Emma withdrew into herself, her sunny personality clouded with a sadness that broke Dylan's heart daily. She stopped drawing her family pictures altogether. At school, her teacher reported she'd become quiet and distracted. At home, she barely touched her dinner and asked repeatedly when they'd see Elise again. "She's busy with work, sweetheart," Dylan would say, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. "But I miss her," Emma would respond, tears welling up. "Can I just call her to say hi?" "Not right now, baby. Maybe later." Later never came. Days stretched into weeks. Dylan threw himself into work with renewed desperation, picking up every extra shift available. He needed the money. But more than that, he needed the exhaustion that came with 16-hour days. When he was too tired to think, he couldn't dwell on the hollow feeling in his chest or the way Emma's eyes had lost their sparkle. Elise, according to Margaret's occasional updates that Dylan didn't ask for but couldn't help listening to, was equally devastated. She'd stopped eating properly, was working herself to exhaustion, and had become obsessed with her memory recovery efforts. She'd even tried experimental treatments, hypnotherapy, anything that might unlock the past. She thinks if she remembers, she can fix this, Margaret had told Dylan during a chance encounter at the hospital. She thinks if she remembers loving you and Emma, you'll let her back into your lives. It doesn't work that way, Dylan had said. Doesn't it? Margaret had challenged. You're punishing her for something she doesn't remember doing, for leaving you 6 years ago through no fault of her own. Is that fair? Dylan had no answer for that. Then, 4 weeks after the separation, everything got infinitely worse. Dylan received a call during his afternoon shift at the hospital. His mother, Eleanor Porter, no relation to Elise, just an unfortunate coincidence of names, who lived 2 hours away and whom he hadn't spoken to in months, wanted to meet with him urgently. They met at a coffee shop halfway between their towns. Eleanor was a severe woman in her late 60s, impeccably dressed, with Dylan's same dark hair now shot through with silver. They'd never had an easy relationship, especially after Juliana's disappearance, when Eleanor had made no secret of her opinion that Dylan was in over his head, trying to raise Emma alone. You look terrible, Eleanor said by way of greeting. It's been a rough month, Dylan replied carefully. What did you want to talk about? Eleanor pulled out a folder, setting it on the table between them. I've been thinking a lot about Emma lately, about her future. Warning bells immediately started ringing in Dylan's head. What about her future? She's 7 years old, Dylan. She needs stability, proper care, opportunities. You're working 2 jobs, barely making ends meet, living in a tiny apartment. Her medical needs alone. We're managing. Dylan interrupted, his voice tight. Are you? Eleanor opened the folder, revealing printed documents. Emma's school reports show her grades dropping. Her teacher notes concerns about her emotional state. You've had to take her to the emergency room twice in the past year. How many shifts have you missed because of childcare issues? How much debt are you in trying to cover her medical expenses? How do you know all this? Dylan demanded. I have friends at her school. I care about my granddaughter, even if you don't want my involvement. Eleanor's tone was crisp. Dylan, I'm not trying to attack you. I'm trying to help. I have resources, a large house, financial stability, time to devote to a young girl's needs. I've been thinking about petitioning for custody. The world seemed to tilt beneath Dylan's feet. You're not serious. I'm completely serious. I've already consulted with a family lawyer. Given your financial situation, your work schedule, and Emma's medical needs, I have a strong case. You can't do this. Dylan's voice was shaking now, with either rage or fear or both. Emma is my daughter. I'm a good father. I'm sure you love her, Eleanor said, not unkindly. But love isn't enough to give her what she needs. Think about it, Dylan. Really think about it. What kind of life can you offer her? What happens when she needs that kidney surgery and you can't afford it? What happens when she wants to go to college someday? Get out, Dylan said quietly. Dylan, get out. His raised voice drew stares from other customers. You come here with your lawyer's folder and your judgment and tell me I'm not good enough for my own daughter? You barely saw her for the first 6 years of her life, and now you want to take her from me? Eleanor stood, gathering her folder. I'll be filing the petition next week. I hope you'll see reason before this goes to court, for Emma's sake. She paused at the door. I really do want what's best for her. I hope you do too. Dylan sat in the coffee shop for an hour after she left, staring at nothing, his mind spiraling. A custody battle. Court, lawyers he couldn't afford. The very real possibility that a judge might look at his financial situation and Emma's medical needs and decide Eleanor was right. He could lose her. He could actually lose Emma. When Dylan finally made it home, hours late, he found Emma at the neighbor's, Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who sometimes watched her in emergencies. Emma was asleep on the couch, and Mrs. Chen looked concerned. She was very upset tonight, Mrs. Chen said quietly. Kept asking for someone named Elise. Who is Elise? It's complicated, Dylan said, gathering Emma carefully. Whatever complicated you have going on, fix it, Mrs. Chen advised. That little girl needs stability and happiness, not complicated. At home, Dylan laid Emma in her bed and sat beside her in the dark, watching her sleep. She looked so small, so vulnerable. The idea of losing her was unthinkable, unbearable, impossible. But how was he going to fight this? Eleanor had money, resources, time. She had a lawyer and a case. What did Dylan have? A battered truck, a 2-bedroom apartment, mounting debt, and a work schedule that kept him away from his daughter more than he was with her. His phone buzzed with a text. Margaret Porter. Dylan, Elise is in the hospital. She collapsed at work. They think it's exhaustion and malnutrition. She's asking for Emma. I know you said to stay away, but she's not well. Dylan stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to maintain the boundaries he'd set. But another part, the part that remembered the woman he'd loved, the part that saw how happy Emma had been with Elise in their lives, couldn't just leave her suffering. He looked at Emma sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. What would serve her best? Protecting her from potential heartbreak or allowing her to have a relationship with her mother, even if that mother didn't remember being one. Dylan thought about Eleanor's custody petition, about the upcoming court battle, about having to prove he could provide Emma with everything she needed. And suddenly, he had a thought that was either brilliant or insane. He made a decision. The next morning, Dylan called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. He got Emma ready for school, then drove straight to Brookhaven General Hospital where Elise had been admitted. She was in a private room, looking pale and fragile against the white sheets. An IV drip ran into her arm. When she saw Dylan in the doorway, her eyes widened with surprise. "Dylan? What are you—" "We need to talk," Dylan interrupted. "About everything. About the truth." He spent the next hour telling her about Eleanor's custody petition, about the impossible situation he was in, about his terror of losing Emma. And then, taking the biggest risk of his life, he told her his idea. "What if we told Emma the truth?" he said. "What if we explained who you really are? And what if we presented ourselves to the court as a united front? You have resources, stability, everything Eleanor thinks I'm lacking. If we're together, if we're a family, are you asking me to pretend to be your wife to win a custody case?" Elise asked carefully. "No," Dylan said, pulling out the locket he wore around his neck. "I'm asking you to actually be my wife. Not pretend, not fake. I'm saying maybe we try to rebuild what we had. You may not remember our past, but maybe we could create a new future." "Dylan, you just spent a month telling me to stay away. You said it wasn't fair to Emma." "I was scared," Dylan admitted. "I'm still scared. But I'm more scared of losing her completely. And the truth is, she needs you. I've watched her for the past month, seen how much she's suffering without you. She was happier with you in her life than she'd been since you left the first time." Elise was quiet for a long moment, her hand unconsciously going to her own locket. "What about you?" she finally asked. "What do you need?" The question hung in the air between them. Dylan thought about the past months, about how natural it had felt to have Elise around, how right it looked when she held Emma, how much he'd missed her himself, even though he'd been the one to push her away. "I need to know we're doing this for the right reasons," he said honestly. "Not just to win a court case. If we tell Emma the truth, if we do this, we're committed. For real. For better or worse." "I don't remember saying those words the first time," Elise said softly. "But I'd like to mean them this time." Before Dylan could respond, there was a commotion in the hallway. Raised voices, someone saying, "You can't go in there." And then Emma burst into the room, Mrs. Chen rushing behind her looking apologetic. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Chen panted. "She saw your truck in the parking lot from the school bus. She insisted—" But Emma wasn't listening to the adults. She was staring at Elise in the hospital bed, tears already streaming down her face. "Elise, you're sick. I knew something was wrong. I told Daddy we needed to check on you, but he said—" She stopped, looking between Dylan and Elise, seeing something in their expressions. "What's happening? Why do you both look so serious?" Dylan and Elise exchanged glances. This wasn't how they'd planned it, wasn't the right time or place. But Emma was here, and she was asking questions, and maybe there would never be a perfect moment for this conversation. "Emma, honey," Dylan began, then stopped, not knowing how to continue. Elise slowly reached up and unclasped her locket, then held out her hand toward Dylan. "May I see yours?" Dylan pulled his own locket over his head and placed it in her palm. Emma watched, transfixed, as Elise brought the two pieces together. They fit perfectly, forming one complete heart. "Emma," Elise said gently, "there's something we need to tell you." Emma stared at the completed heart pendant in Elise's hands, her young mind visibly trying to process what she was seeing. Mrs. Chen, sensing this was a private family moment, quietly excused herself, though not before giving Dylan an encouraging nod. Dylan moved to sit on the edge of Elise's hospital bed, positioning himself where Emma could see both their faces. His daughter stood frozen near the door, her backpack still on, confusion and hope warring in her expression. "Come here, sweetheart," Dylan said softly, holding out his hand. Emma approached slowly, never taking her eyes off the joined lockets. When she was close enough, Dylan gently took her backpack off and lifted her onto his lap, positioning her between him and Elise. "Emma, do you remember how I told you that your mommy had to go away when you were very little?" Dylan began, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him. Emma nodded, her eyes darting between the adults. "And do you remember asking me if she'd ever come back?" Another nod. Dylan took a shaky breath. "What if I told you that she did come back, but something happened that made it so she couldn't remember us?" Emma's brow furrowed. "Like in the princess movie, where the witch makes her forget." "Sort of," Elise interjected gently. "Except there wasn't a witch. There was a car accident, a really bad one, about 6 years ago. When I woke up in the hospital, I couldn't remember anything about my life before. Not my name, not where I lived, not..." Her voice broke. "Not my family." Emma's eyes went wide. "You mean, the woman who saved me, who gave me a new name and a new life, called me Elise," the woman continued. "But before the accident, my name was Juliana Tate, and I was married to your daddy." The room fell silent, except for the quiet beeping of medical monitors. Emma looked at Dylan, seeking confirmation, and he nodded. "Elise is... you're my mommy?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, baby," Elise said, tears streaming freely down her face now. "I'm your mother. I gave birth to you 7 years ago, and I loved you so much. I still do, even though I can't remember those first few months we had together." Emma's small hands reached out tentatively to touch the joined lockets. "That's why it felt like I knew you," she said, wonder in her voice. "When we first met at the museum, you felt like home." "You felt like home to me too," Elise confirmed. "From the very first moment, my heart knew you, even when my brain didn't." "But why didn't you tell me?" Emma asked, a hint of hurt creeping into her voice. "Why did we have to pretend?" Dylan fielded this one. "We wanted to protect you, sweetheart. We didn't want to confuse you or hurt you. And we needed time to figure out what this meant, how to handle it." "I'm not a baby," Emma said with surprising firmness. "You should have told me." "You're absolutely right," Elise agreed. "We should have. We made a mistake, and I'm sorry." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing everything. Then, with the directness only children possess, she asked, "Do you remember loving Daddy? Do you remember loving me?" The question hung heavy in the air. Elise reached out to cup Emma's face gently. "I don't remember the specific moments," she said honestly. "I don't remember the day you were born, or your first smile, or the first time you said mama. But Emma, I feel the love. It's there, even without the memories. When I look at you, my heart knows you're mine. Does that make sense?" Emma nodded slowly, then asked the question that made both adults' hearts stop. "Are you going to leave again?" "No," Elise said firmly, without hesitation. "Never. I lost 6 years with you because of an accident I couldn't control. I'm not losing another day by choice. I promise you, Emma, I'm staying." "But you left before," Emma said, and the pain in her voice was evident. "The other kids at school said my mom left because she didn't want me. Is that true? Did you not want me?" "Oh, baby, no." Elise was crying openly now, pulling Emma into a fierce hug. "That's not true at all. I was going to a job interview that day, trying to get a better position so we could afford a nicer place for you to grow up. I was trying to give you more opportunities. The accident happened on the way there. I never wanted to leave you." Emma clung to Elise, her own tears starting to flow. "I missed you. Even though I didn't remember you, I missed you." Dylan wrapped his arms around both of them, the three of them forming a tight unit on the hospital bed. For long minutes, they just held each other, grieving the lost years and celebrating the miracle of being reunited. Finally, Emma pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. With typical 7-year-old pragmatism, she asked, "So, does this mean we're going to live together? Like a real family?" Dylan and Elise exchanged glances over her head. They hadn't gotten that far in their conversation before Emma arrived. "We want to," Dylan said carefully. "But there's something else we need to tell you. Something that's happening that's going to affect all of us." He explained about Eleanor's custody petition in terms Emma could understand. How her grandmother thought she could provide a better home, how there would be a court hearing, how a judge would decide what was best for Emma. "But I want to stay with you," Emma said immediately, looking at Dylan. "You're my daddy. Why would a judge say I can't?" "Because sometimes grown-ups think they know what's best, even when they don't," Elise said. "Your grandmother loves you, Emma. She's not trying to be mean. She just thinks she can give you things your daddy can't. A big house, money for doctors, that kind of thing." "But Daddy gives me everything I need," Emma protested. "He makes me breakfast every morning with smiley faces. He never misses tucking me in, even when he's really tired. He helps me with my homework and takes me to the park and he loves me." "I know he does," Elise assured her, "and I'm going to help make sure the judge knows it too." "How?" Emma asked. This was the moment. Dylan took a deep breath. "Emma, what if Elise, your mom, came to live with us? What if we became a real family again, all together?" Emma's face lit up like sunrise. "Really? You mean it?" "We mean it," Elise confirmed, reaching for Dylan's hand. "If your daddy is willing to give me another chance, I want to be part of this family. I want to be your mom, not just your friend. And I want to help fight to keep you exactly where you belong, with your father." "With both my parents," Emma corrected. And the simple statement made both adults' eyes well up again. Over the next hour, they talked through the logistics. Elise would be discharged from the hospital the following day. She'd move into Dylan's apartment temporarily. It would be cramped, but they'd make it work. They'd present a united front to Eleanor and her lawyers. Most importantly, they'd get to know each other again as a family. "I should warn you," Elise said to Emma with a slight smile. "I'm not very good at some mom things. I don't remember how to do them. You might have to teach me." "That's okay," Emma said generously. "I can show you how Daddy does everything, and we can learn together." The court date was set for 3 weeks away. In that time, Dylan, Elise, and Emma became a whirlwind of activity. Elise officially moved into the apartment, turning the living room into a combined office and sleeping area so Emma could keep her room. Margaret Porter, fully supportive of the reunion, provided legal counsel and helped prepare their case. They gathered evidence, photos of their time together over the past months, testimony from Emma's teacher about how much happier she'd been when Elise was in her life. Medical records confirming Elise's amnesia and establishing her as Emma's biological mother. DNA tests were officially filed with the court, confirming beyond any doubt that Elise Porter, formerly Juliana Tate, was Emma's mother. Birth certificates were amended. Legal documents were filed to restore Juliana's identity while maintaining her business interests under the name Elise Porter. More importantly, they became a family. Elise learned Emma's routines, the way she liked her sandwiches cut diagonally, how she needed her stuffed rabbit to sleep, the specific voice Dylan used when reading bedtime stories. Dylan watched in amazement as maternal instincts he couldn't remember seemed to surface naturally in Elise, as if her body remembered even when her mind didn't. They had family dinners together every night, Elise using her considerable resources to ensure they ate well while Dylan insisted on doing most of the cooking. It was one of the few things he could control. They helped Emma with homework, tag teaming when one of them got stuck. They tucked her in together, Dylan reading while Elise sat on the other side of the bed, running her fingers through Emma's hair. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments, times when Elise would do something and Dylan would freeze, recognizing a gesture or expression from 6 years ago. Times when Emma would reference memories Elise couldn't share. Moments of grief for what was lost, mixing with joy for what they were building. But it was real. And it was theirs. The night before the custody hearing, after Emma was asleep, Dylan and Elise sat together on the small balcony of his apartment, looking out at Brookhaven's modest skyline. "Are you nervous?" Elise asked. "Terrified," Dylan admitted. "What if the judge thinks this is all too convenient? What if Eleanor convinces them we're just putting on a show?" "Then we tell the truth," Elise said simply. "That, yes, the timing is convenient, but the love is real. That we're a family who got torn apart by tragedy and found our way back to each other. That Emma belongs with both her parents." "What if we lose?" Dylan's voice was small, vulnerable. Elise took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "We won't. I won't let that happen. I lost 6 years with you and Emma. I'm not losing any more time." They sat in silence for a moment before Dylan spoke again. "I'm falling in love with you again," he said quietly. "Is that crazy? You're the same person I loved before, but you're also different. And I'm falling for both versions of you." Elise turned to look at him, her eyes shining in the dim light. "I wish I could remember loving you before," she said. "But I'm falling in love with you now. And maybe that's enough. Maybe we don't need the past when we have the present and the future." Dylan leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that was both familiar and new, a promise and a beginning. Tomorrow they would fight for their family. Tonight, they were already home. The courtroom was smaller than Dylan had imagined, less dramatic than television had led him to believe. But the stakes couldn't have been higher. Eleanor sat with her attorney on one side, projecting confidence and wealth. Dylan, Elise, and their lawyer, provided by Margaret Porter, sat on the other. Emma was in a waiting room with a child advocate, spared from having to sit through most of the proceedings. But the judge had indicated he'd want to speak with her privately before making his decision. The hearing proceeded methodically. Eleanor's lawyer presented financial records, work schedules, medical bills, everything designed to paint Dylan as struggling and overwhelmed. Then their lawyer countered with the complete picture. Emma's excellent school performance when stable, testimonies from teachers and neighbors about Dylan's devoted parenting, and most importantly, the extraordinary circumstances of Elise's return. Medical experts testified about retrograde amnesia. DNA results were entered into evidence. The judge examined the matching lockets with interest, asking detailed questions about the timeline of events. When it was time for Emma to speak with the judge privately, Dylan's heart nearly stopped. Everything could hinge on what his daughter said in that room. 20 minutes later, Emma emerged, going straight to Dylan and Elise, hugging them both. The judge returned to the bench with an unreadable expression. "This is an unusual case," Judge Morrison began. "Mrs. Eleanor Porter clearly loves her granddaughter and has the financial means to provide for her. However, the court must consider what serves the interest of the young girl at the center of this petition." Dylan held his breath. "Emma is a remarkably articulate and emotionally intelligent person," the judge continued. "She spoke very clearly about her life, her needs, and her wishes. She loves her grandmother, but is unequivocal about wanting to remain with her father. Furthermore, the reunion of this family, however unconventional the circumstances, provides Emma with both parents, emotional stability, and the medical resources she needs through her mother's insurance and financial capabilities." Eleanor's face fell as she realized where this was heading. "The petition for custody is denied," Judge Morrison declared. "Emma will remain with her father, Dylan Porter, and her mother, Elise Porter. I'm recommending family counseling to help navigate the unique circumstances of Mrs. Porter's amnesia and the family's reunion. I'm also strongly encouraging regular visitation with the grandmother, as family connections are important." The gavel came down. Dylan felt Elise grip his hand tightly, both of them too overwhelmed to speak. Emma, understanding enough to know they'd won, let out a whoop of joy that made even the judge smile. Outside the courthouse, Eleanor approached them hesitantly. "I'm sorry," she said, tears in her eyes. "I truly thought I was doing the right thing. I just wanted her to have everything." "She does have everything," Elise said gently. "She has a family. And that includes you, if you'd like to be part of it." Eleanor looked at her son, who nodded. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.